Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Bass Fishing for Noobs here on the Paddle and Fin podcast. I'm your host, Sean.
And I'm Susie Q.
So tonight we have just Susie and I are going to kind of spill our knowledge on a few subjects. So we're going to go kind of back to the basics. And we're going to talk about line choice and the different types of fishing line, when you use the different types, and kind of jump into that rabbit hole, if you will. And then we'll also talk a little bit about knots and the knots that we use, and the different applications for those as well. But before we jump into all that fun stuff, I wanted to give Susie a chance to share some of the news that she recently got, because it's all pretty exciting stuff. So Susie.
That's right. Most of the folks who know me know that I am pretty involved with volunteering with the Women's Fishing Foundation and whatnot. And, it was recently announced that Christine was stepping down as one of the board members. There's three. So there's Amanda Brannon, Mel Isaacs, and then Christine Fisher. As we all know, Christine is insanely busy, has a lot going on, travels all over the place. So, it was definitely a hard decision for her to make. But as you can probably see where this is going, I have taken her spot on the board. I am the treasurer now for the Women's Women's Fishing Federation. And so definitely some exciting news with that. And then we also have some committee members as well that are going to be helping us to, make sure that, we can keep growing, keep doing awesome things. And next year will be the 5th year having been started. So we're hoping for an awesome 5-year anniversary, because it's crazy that's already been 5 years, So that's the first big announcement. I kind of feel like I'm in an infomercial, oh, wait, there's more. Second big announcement is kind of more like locally, in a sense. So I'm also on the staff with KBL, Kayak Bass League, which is based out of Illinois, Wisconsin. And I've been involved with them since 2017, I believe. No, 2016. Well, I joined the club in 2016. Then I think I got on staff in 2017. And the president, owner, Alan Wiedmeyer, is going to be retiring from KBL. Next year is going to be his last year. And then 2025, I will be the new owner, president of Kayak Bass League. So,
Nice.
Yeah, definitely a lot of crazy things going on, but super excited for all of them, and can't wait to, see how we can grow, and just, I'm just hoping for positive things, good things, positive things, just, yeah, it's going to be good.
Well, I mean, both of those organizations, you've done a lot of work for them behind the scenes for a long time. So,
oh yes,
I think being in a more leadership position will hopefully give you a little more say into your ideas and that kind of thing. So,
right.
hopefully that will be a big positive step for you. And congrats, that's awesome news.
Thank you. Yeah. Definitely exciting. So, I know we're going to start putting permits in and stuff like that for next year. With Illinois, November 1st is when you can apply for permits for the following year. And then Wisconsin, I think you can put them in for just about any time. I mean, Wisconsin's kind of cool when it comes to fishing tournaments, because, And Illinois started this weird thing a couple years ago where, you have to tell them we are tournament amounts were, and you're supposed to give a percentage back to the state, and it was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you got to do with that money?
Exactly.
Anyway.
They're like, "Oh, you're making some money?
Yes,
We're gonna
definitely
go
looking
ahead and
forward
need
to
a
it.
cut of
Lots of good
that."
things. Yeah, I'm excited.
Crazy. Awesome. Are you hearing me, Susie?
Yep. Okay, there we
Okay.
go.
Okay,
I
cool.
think my microphone jack is a little loose on
Jack.
this thing. I'm not in my she shed because we've been having some internet issues. So I'm on the home station, the big desktop computer my husband has. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Anywho, but yeah, so jumping right into our topics for today. So we're going to talk to you about some fishing line. We're really going back to the basics here. Shortly before we got on the show, I was kind of, looking on Wikipedia and other stuff like that. I was just like, well, what is the origin of fishing line, And I found a couple of different things, which, aren't surprising, but it's still fascinating. Believe it or not, it was actually depicted in ancient Egyptian art of fishermen using a rod, line, and a hook, which is like 2000 BC. So, I mean, it's been around for a really long time, probably way even before that. I'm surprised, we don't have other depictions from like, cavemen and stuff like that. But anyway, still pretty cool though. So apparently the first natural line was first made from like silk glands in a moth, kind of like silkworms are make like silk for fabric or whatever. So I found that pretty cool. But when it comes to like fluorocarbon, mono, or braid, those things weren't actually introduced until, the 19th century. So the world's first synthesized nylon wasn't created until 1937. And then, of course, in Japan, there was another type of synthesized nylon in 1939. And then it wasn't until 1970, and I thought that this was pretty cool. I actually didn't know who like the first fluorocarbon maker was in a sense, but it was actually Seagar is when they debuted, was in 1970. So I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. But it wasn't around until 1990 that bass fishermen actually began to use fluorocarbon as main line on their spinning and bait casting reels. At the time, they were looking at, different characteristics of line, lower visibility, high abrasion, et cetera, and whatnot. And then, let's see here. Yeah, then in the 2000s is when, like, fishing line has just kind of, like, blown up in a sense.
Right.
You've got all your different brands, you've got different types of fluorocarbon, you've got different colors, different sizes, etc., everything under the sun type of thing. So I thought it was pretty cool to kind of take a little bit of a dip into history when it comes to fishing line.
Yeah, very cool. It's like some of that goes back way longer than I mean, even like the new like fluorocarbon, I didn't realize was around for that long. I mean, that's pretty crazy. So
right, but then like at the same time, I was almost thinking, I was like, man, wouldn't it have been around maybe sooner than that? But then I'm like, well, I guess, when you think about fluorocarbon, what is fluorocarbon when you think about? Well, it's just basically like melted plastic in a sense.
Right.
And it's just pulled through a really tiny hole and then just stretched into a line basically. So I'm like, well, it probably would have taken a pretty unique individual to, sit around and be like, oh, hey, what happens if I take this melted plastic, just pull it through a little hole, and does that create line?
Yeah.
Just
Right.
kind of silly, interesting little things. But so yeah, we're going to talk about the different kinds of lines. So I've mentioned, fluorocarbon, and then there's monofilament, and then we have braid, and then we also have a copolymer. Hopefully, I say that right. My brain always gets confused when I try to sometimes say it. But I don't know about you guys, but I think everybody started out back in the day with, just your cheap, go to your big box store and get, a $5 spool that has like, 300 or 500 yards of just plain old monofilament line. I mean, you could do just about anything with that line. You didn't care if, like, you kept it in your garage for 3 years, you'd still go out and use it the next season or whatnot. But basically, when it comes to monofilament, it definitely has advantages, and then it also has disadvantages. One of its biggest advantages is it's less likely to snap as your fluorocarbon. So it's got a lot of stretch to it in a sense. So if you've ever like gotten snagged on a log or something like that, and you had mono on there, and you feel like you're just pulling your line, you're like, Jesus, is this thing like actually moving? Chances are it's your line that's actually stretching in a sense. And then it'll just stretch to a certain point to when then it will finally just snap.
Which, depending on the application, can be good. There
Right.
are times where that is advantageous, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and times when it's not as advantageous. So,
Right. Um, Another quality, and this could be a pro or con versus how you're, applying it. But monofilament floats. So, if you're wanting to use top water, um, if you don't care about, your line floating in the water or whatnot, maybe it might change the appearance of your bait in the water. That can actually be a con in some instances. You may not want your line to float up and make your bait do weird things or anything like that, whereas you might want it to.
yeah, and that's actually the application that I use it most for. Is I use it for my top water leaders,
Mm-hmm.
um, because it floats, and I guess one of the other, most of the time, I guess you would consider it a pro, is that it's also probably the cheapest out of all the types of lines. Um,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
even with it, with as with anything, there are cheaper monos and more expensive monos, and you do get what you pay for sometimes. If you go buy the cheapest spool of Walmart brand, mono, odds are it's not going to have kind of the same strength quality, even for the same pound strength, that maybe a little bit of a higher quality mono would have. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so another thing when it comes to mono is it's definitely easier to tie knots with. It's just kind of got that um, what do you call that? I don't know. I almost compare it to like it having like a slicker or different surface than fluorocarbon does. So I feel like it ties better in a sense. And I mean, like once you've got that knot on there, like you're gonna be pretty solid with that knot. Where it comes to fluorocarbon, you've got some decent knot strength, but if you're dry tying your knot on fluoro, chances are you're going to have that knot break at your first hook set, because it does not play well with heat.
No, it's not.
Um,
Abrasion resistance is not a strength of
yes,
fluoro. So
yes. But when it does come to mono, though, I know mono can have a little bit better of abrasion resistance than compared to fluoro as well. Oh, let's see here. Um,
What would you say line memory wise? Would you say
ooh.
which would you say is better there?
Um, I would say the better line for that is probably going to be probably mono. I can't tell you how many times I've spooled up a spinning reel with fluorocarbon, and man, it's like windy, 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 like crazy. But and we'll kind of touch on this subject a little bit more too. But typically, when I'm using fluorocarbon on a spinning rod, I don't tie a very long leader to it in a sense for that specific reason, because especially if it's windy or anything like that. I mean, you'll get knotted up and just it can be a little bit of a nightmare. So chances are you're going to be better off using mono on a spinning reel if you don't want to deal or hassle around with the memory on the line or whatnot. Or you could try a line conditioner.
I was gonna say line conditioners are out there, and I've also even heard weird things about like putting your spool in hot water as you're spooling it, and uh,
Yes.
all sorts of uh, you know cures or remedies for that kind of thing online. Yeah, I'm sure like if you just search for it, you can find everybody's tricks and weird things. But
It's funny you mentioned that because I'm trying to think of when I first heard somebody doing that. I think it might have been at the women's fishing event uh, back in September. Is somebody said, well, if you put it in a pan or a pot or something of hot water, and then you put one of the lids that has like the hole
yep,
on top of it,
yep.
and you spool it that way, and like my mind was blown. I was like, first off, like to even think of doing that, just like what? Apparently, putting it in the hot water really helps with like the memory issues that you have in the line. So I was like, okay. And then after that, like I swear, like at least once a week, I'll see it on TikTok.
hmm
It's like it knows.
Yep. Oh yeah. Shh, that's listening.
Yeah, I know, right?
Now, do you speaking of that, do you have like a line spooling station, or do you do the whole pencil through it and have somebody hold it?
So, I actually just use so I got them at Bass Pro. They're little not like tackle boxes, but they're like clear cases that hold your spools. And then on the front of it, it's got little openings that you feed the line through. And then I just spool it like that. I
Okay.
don't know if that's technically a right way or a wrong way, but I used to do the whole, put it on a pencil or something like that, put it down underneath my feet, and then
Yep.
reel it like that. But with the spool box thing that I have, like I just put like something in front of it because like sometimes it'll move
hmm
as I'm reeling it in. But no, that thing works pretty great. So I don't need a fancy $50 line spooler thingamajig that I've seen people have or whatnot. But hey, it's whatever you find that works out best for you.
Right. Right. I'm sure if I did more line spooling, it might be come into more handy to actually have a station like that. But I don't do it that often enough that I feel like I have to go buy one of those line
Mm-hmm.
stations. Although I know Brad Hurlboss had one at the Paddle and Fin meetup last year or
Mm.
2 years ago. Do you remember that when we took all of Jay's rod or reels, and even though he didn't really agree to it, we were like, "Hey, we're respooling your reels,"
Did
and he's
I
like,
miss that? I must have missed that.
well, that was we all. I guess somehow they got on the topic of Jay's reels not being spooled properly, and they just took all of his reels and respooled them. And Brad, I think, had one of those cool ones that are just attached to the table there, and you know he was uh, respooling all of his lines, and I was like, that's kind of cool. I could see springing for that at some point, but
Mm-hmm.
still
Mm-hmm.
have not done that. So, um, but yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have braid, which braid is like overall like your strongest line. Like if you've got like 20, 30, 50, 60 pound braid and you get snagged, you're not going to break that line trying to pop it off. You're going to have to cut that sucker. Braid is stupid strong. However, because of what braid is made of, it's like interlocking pieces of like nylon or certain type of like fabric in a sense. Bad thing about it is it has poor abrasion resistance. So if you're dragging on the bottom of like a rocky uh, ground or something like that, or you've got some submerged stumps that you're pulling through or whatnot, you gotta be careful with that because that can definitely degrade your line and break over time. But on the plus side, and I don't think we talked about this yet either, is so fluorocarbon. They definitely say to after a year of having it on your fishing line, it's in your best interest to replace it, mainly because of wear and tear. I know there are most brands do have like a certain amount of UV resistance
Hmm.
built into like the plastic material, but over the course of time of being on that spool, the grit and stuff that can build up on it or whatnot can definitely degrade the line that you have. So it's best to replace it. However, when it comes to braid, you can make braid last for years if you really wanted to. That's the great thing. It definitely has a longevity to it. But braid it's you can find some pretty affordable braid. Um, and then you might have some more expensive ones as well. It's a little bit cheaper than fluoro, but it is more expensive than mono, in a sense. Again, depending upon brands you're looking for, how big of a spool you're wanting, applications, et cetera, type of thing.
So
Uh,
as far as we did talk a little. We talked about braid being float or mono floats.
oh yes,
I don't know if we mentioned it, but fluorocarbon definitely sinks,
sinks. Yep.
and braid actually floats as well.
Yes, braid's a
But
floater.
like the reason I don't use straight braid on my top waters is because it tends to also kind of bind up it, or it comes back on itself. So if you're working a popper through past your line, a lot of times your line will just sit there and kind of back up to it, and then
Mm-hmm.
I seem to get tangled more. Whereas mono will kind of keep itself, not necessarily 100% straight, but definitely straighter
Mm-hmm.
than braid will. But
Yes, yeah.
but
And
go
it's interesting because like when it comes to braid, like braid has absolutely no memory.
mm-hmm.
But like if you were to just throw braid out onto the water, it's not going to stay straight because it's not like a tensed material in a sense. It's more of like a fabric. Whereas your mono or your fluoro, it's like a plastic, so it's more rigid in a sense. So it's going to keep sort of like the shape that it came out for a lot longer, unless it has memory, like which fluorocarbon does. So yeah, braid with it being, the fabric material that it is, yes, if you are leaving something out there, it can kind of, you know, zigzag and curly and whatnot on the water, um, type of thing. Um,
So the main reason
yeah.
I use braid, one of the main reasons is casting distance, because I feel like, especially on a spinning rod, I can cast braid way farther than I can either even mono or especially fluoro. But I'm also even on my spinning or on my bait casting reels, I still do braid to leader for most applications. I tried spooling up straight fluoro a couple times, and I just have more of a mess with that than I do with braid. I don't know what it is about it, but and people have told me, oh, for like crankbaiting and stuff, you should definitely just use straight fluorocarbon. And the only thing that tempts me about trying that is not having to tie leader knots. You know, if you're
Mm-hmm.
basically just tying right onto the lure, and every time you have to retie, you're not having to retie a leader or anything. So um, that's the only thing that kind of tempts me to, but I still have not really. I tried it like on one rod one time, and I was like, I had more headaches with it than I cared about. So I kind of left it up. I kind of left it go, and have since done mostly braid to leader, even on my bait casters. But how about you? Do you run straight fluoro for applications?
So, yeah, there's a couple of different ways that I run my setups on my rods. So, I'll start from like my heavy setups to like my finesse. So, like starting with heavy, if I'm in, thick weeds and muck and stuff like that, in top water, especially in like stained water, I'm just straight braid. I have one top water reel that is just straight braid. It's just my basic go-to frog rod. I think I have, what do I have on there? I think I have 50 pound on there. Mainly because with as thick as weeds that I have, and even like the lily pads that I have, sometimes you can get wrapped up around there, and like even 20-pound braid can break. But if you want to know that the line that you have on is going to hold up to what you're fishing through, definitely heavy braid is the way to go. And then working down from that, so any other reels that I would have 10-pound or more fluoro or mono on, I'm going to back those reels with at least 90% braid. Main reason being is because braid's cheaper than fluoro. Fluoro is stupid expensive, especially if you have, 10, 15 reels to fill. When you think about it, the longevity of fluoro, you're just like, geez, man, I'm going to drop a couple $100 just online just to respool my reels each year. So I was like, there's got to be a different way. And so a couple years ago, I learned, a couple of people had done this as well. I was like, oh, this is actually genius because you can keep braid on there forever. I mean, like maybe after like 2 years or whatever, you might want to take a look at it and change it out. But I mean, it's solid. And so what I'll do is I'll have 90% of the spool filled with braid. And then depending upon the application, so like, my Texas rigs, bottom baits, and then, kind of like my chatter baits, moving baits, that type of stuff. I'll run as short as probably like 10 foot, and then like I'll go as big as maybe like 30 feet sometimes for my leader on there. And it just, I've had the most success with those types of setups for, ever since I've been doing that. Then when it comes to like the ultra finesse stuff, so like, drop shot, shaky head, Ned, those types of things. Most of the time, you're not necessarily using your whole reel to throw something like that out there. So most of the time, I'll do about maybe 50-50, just because when it comes to finesse, most of the time, like I'm usually in clear water. And I know some people are a little bit more particular about the little details, but like, I want to make sure that the fish aren't going to see the line, because, if I have braid and then I have clear on there, they might be able to see it in a sense if I have a shorter leader on it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, usually with those, I'll kind of do 50-50. And then there might be like another situation where I've done just straight fluoro, which is, I'm trying to think which one I do have straight fluoro on. It might be my chatterbait. No, actually, I don't remember. There was one rod I made up this year, just did straight fluoro, and I, for the life of me, can't remember what it was now. But then when it comes to my spinning reels, I'll do the same thing. Most of the time, it just depends on the application which I'm using. But again, with spinning reels, I have one that is 90% braid, and then the other one's 50-50 as well. Just again, kind of the heavier application, the more braid I have. The less heavy I have on there, I've got more of either the mono or the fluoro on it.
Gotcha. Okay. I think for most of my spinning rods, I do, I do a cheap mono backing,
Mm-hmm.
then mostly braid, and then for my leaders, and I forget somebody we interviewed at some point in the time talked about that was making your leader basically your rod length or like a rod and a half length to
Mm-hmm.
so that
Mm-hmm.
your knot is not regularly going through the reel. Like if it
Right.
and
Yep.
so I forget who first told me that, but so now usually when I do my leaders, if I have to tie on a new leader, I do one, two of my full arms, and then about a half. So that
Mm-hmm.
usually gives. I know just from I use mostly around 7'2" rod length. I know that gives me just enough, so I'll just most of the time be outside the reel with my knot, my connection knot with my leader or my bait hanging, where I normally cast from.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so that's generally what I do, and I'm pretty much. I think all my spinning rods are that mostly braid to fluorocarbon leader. Like I said, except for like that one I have my popper tied onto. I use that with a mono leader just because it floats, and then for my baitcasters, again, like I said, most of them are mostly braid. Um, but I will do on those. I'll do a little bit of longer leader, just because I don't like to tie that as much. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that hurts as much going through. It's not going around that thing on the spinning rod that it's just basically feeding through that gear or what do they call that
Um.
the worm gear or the
Oh, yeah, yeah. What the heck is that part called?
But
Your
that
line
seems like,
guide or something like
yeah, it
that.
seems like the opening on that is a little more not friendly than the it going around the line guide on a spinning reel to me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah. Well, and it also can depend upon what knot you're using
I
as
was just gonna
well.
say, yep.
Which kind of segue a little bit into kind of our next topic. Knots. I grew up and I didn't have my dad or brother or anything to teach me fishing or basic stuff like that. But I very distinctly remember my first time being taught how to tie fishing line was an older gentleman at a private lake that um, we had a membership to, and I must have been like pretty obvious, like it. I didn't know what I was doing. And the guy comes over, he's like, "All right, I'm going to show you how to do this knot, and then you better remember." I'm like, "Okay." And so he showed me how to do the improved clinch knot. And like ever since then, that has been my go-to for everything. Um, and I'm using that knot to tie to, my hooks, to my lures, et cetera, type of thing. Um, it's been tried and true. It's, if it lets me down, it's probably because I didn't retie after some sort of incident, landing a big fish, having a toothy critter on, etc., type of thing, or I didn't wet tie my knot. So when it comes to using anything but braid, you definitely need to make sure that you are wetting your line as you're tying it, because, and a lot of people may not realize this, but when you're cinching down that knot with that line, you're actually creating friction, which creates heat. And if you know that type of material, it doesn't play very well with heat. And so it can actually damage the line, weaken the line, and cause you to break off and for your knots to fail as well. So just always make sure to wet your lines if you're using mono, fluoro, even copolymer as well. What's your go-to knot for tying hooks and lures and stuff like that?
Mine is definitely the uni knot, and I looked at the improved clinch, and for some reason I thought the uni knot was easier. So I started learning to tie that, and now I can tie that one in my sleep, in the dark, that kind of thing. So, and it works. I mean, when we get to talking to leader knots, you just basically, to do a leader knot, you tie two of them and pull them together against each other. So, once I learned that knot, that was the one I used, and I still use 90% of the time, because I can tie it in my sleep. And, I can tie the improved clinch, but I just find the uni knots a little bit easier. Sometimes when I tie the improved clinch, I have trouble keeping the loop at the end before the twist good enough to run my line back through it. So, and with the double uni, you don't really have you have a big loop, that you're feeding it back through. So it's not as challenging to me to keep that little hole open enough to run the tag end back through. So that's my main reason for tying the uni and the double uni, because again, now I have read a bunch of different articles and stuff about knot strength, and the double uni, or the uni, is not as strong as some of the other ones. But I don't find that I break off that often there, unless, like you said, it's because I didn't retie or something silly like that, or I'll run it over a branch and then definitely nick it up a little bit and cause some problems. But yeah, I don't think it's a lot of time. Now, definitely when I first started, oh man, I would just tie a couple different kinds of overhand knots until, and oh man, how many times?
Right?
Yep, how many times I'd break off that and it'd come back, and you can tell that the end was just exactly what happened. So, but as far as learning to tie knots, there is a million resources out there. YouTube is your friend. I have an app on my iPhone for knots. And there's definitely a lot of cool ones, but as far as other knots, I have played around with the palomar knot, and I find that relatively easy to tie, but I don't know why I don't tie that one more, because there's some people who swear by it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to say that was the one that slips with braid, and I can't remember though. I know there's one knot specifically they say if you tie it with just braid as a connection knot, that it can slip, but I can't remember.
I think that might be just the regular clinch knot.
Okay.
I think that might sound right, because the improved clinch knot, it makes it go back through another loop to help prevent any slipping. Because I would use just a regular clinch knot, several years ago, and then I noticed that either like sometimes the line would be slipping or whatever. I'd be like, what's going on? And now that I think about it, I was like, I think I had that happen more on braid than anything else. And then once I switched to the improved clinch knot, then I didn't have any problems whatsoever. So
gotcha.
It's probably just the regular clinch knot that does that one. But I could be wrong, or there could be more than one knot that line has a tendency to slip up on as well.
No, and there is a ton of different knots for different applications out there too. Like there's the snell knot that actually wraps around the barb of the hook, or the shaft of
Mm.
the hook. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when you buy like trout fishing lines, pre-tied hooks with line on
Yes.
them, a lot of times those are tied with the snell knot. And I have watched videos and tied that successfully, but I just don't use it that often. But I just know that it's a type of knot, and that it's not horribly hard to tie.
Mm-hmm.
There's I know a lot of people tie for topwater lures. They'll tie a loop knot where you actually you're not you have a loop at the end of your line, and then it goes to a knot, and it helps for like walk the dog action and stuff like that. I've heard of that knot.
Hmm.
I don't tie that one either. If I want that kind of extra stuff, I'll just tie a snap on the end of my line, and that kind of accomplishes the same thing. Uh, but so I know that that's out there. How about for line to, or line connecting knots? What do you use for that?
Yeah, so my go-to knot for probably the past 6 years or so has definitely been the Alberto knot. So um, it I think it's really effective when you're going from braid to fluoro or braid to mono. It just I I feel like I've just had more luck with that than other types. I know there's like the double uni and you know double other things or
Mm.
something like that. Now it did take me a good season to really kind of get this knot down and like in a sense like have it perfected, because like now I can probably sit there and probably do it or whatever, but beforehand I'd have to be like really fine tuning and holding the line in a certain way. It can be challenging with some of these knots because some of them, like you look at the picture and you're just like, how? Like what?
That's the FG knot for me. I have tried that. I've bought the little tool that's supposed to help you tie it, where it has you wrap it around this end and you wrap it around this end, and then you can wrap the line around, and then you take off this end and you reattach. It's I still can't tie that, and I've watched about a million videos. But even the Alberto, I struggle. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Brad Hicks. When he was still with Paddle and Fin, he actually put a video. There is a Paddle and Fin video of Brad tying up Alberto knot, and that was probably, out of all the Alberto knot videos that I've seen, that was the one that I thought was probably the easiest to follow. I really liked it, and the challenge with me with the Alberto knot is exactly what you were saying, is the where to pinch and how to pinch. Because I cut the tip of my thumb off my left hand cutting salad one time, and it's still there. It has like a little flat spot. I don't know if you can see it, but basically I have no feeling in the tip of my thumb on my left hand. So when I'm pinching something with that, I can't always tell if I'm pinching tight. It's just a weird feeling, and that's why I think when you were talking about how you have to like pinch and then you're like trying to figure out how to move it, that's exactly me tying that knot. And if I'm tying it at home, sometimes I will tie it, but if I'm out on the water, there's no chance. I'll tie a double uni every time, because the double uni is a bigger knot, and it I don't like how it goes through the guides. You can definitely hear it going tick tick tick, out through
Mm-hmm.
the lines. Whereas when I do tie the Alberto, I think it definitely goes through the guides better. I don't have many rods that have like the micro guide, so I know that's really like the main concern with those micro guide lines or rods. But I don't have too many lines or rods that have that, so that's not a huge concern for me. But I know it definitely, and I have had that knot fail, the double uni fail eventually, like all after casting it all day and having it go through the line guides. It does eventually wear out from that, constantly hitting those line guides on cast after cast after cast. So
Mm-hmm.
that if I can, I will say that if you do learn the double uni, that is one of the negatives for that knot. But at least as far as I'm concerned, I think it's one of the easier line to line knots. But again, the The Alberto is also, and I've heard there's like different versions of that too. Like there's the crazy Alberto. I don't know exactly what that means, but
Right. Yeah. The improved or
yeah.
the simple, it just, yeah, there's
Well,
different.
yeah, there's like the Rapala knot, which to me looks pretty much like a clinch or improved clinch, but I don't know what the difference is. I think you go through the one loop one extra time with the Rapala knot. I don't know, but
Yeah, yeah, I can kind of see how it would look like that in a sense. It's just like it's a different variation in a sense, but you tie a loop, and then with the extra bit, then you go through the leader or go through your lure, and then still with that tag in, then you go through the opening of that overhand knot, and then you like go around, and then with your tag, and then you go back through. Yeah, it's yeah. The rat, you chase the rabbit up the hole.
there's
However
a
those
reason why
go.
I never, growing up, when they taught us how to tie shoes in school, I could not do that stupid rabbit around the whole thing. I for the longest time tied two loops, went through each other with overhand, and that was it. And
Yep.
I could not. I don't know what it was about that the other way, but so I should have known that when it came to tying knots and fishing line, I was gonna be have a challenge because I couldn't even tie my shoes for the longest time. But
Right. Just need to get those Back to the Future shoes where they just
oh yeah,
automatically cinch for you.
oh
Yeah.
dude, I rocked the kangaroos for the longest time because Velcro was where it was at until then
Heck
it wasn't
yeah.
cool to wear the Velcro shoes, and then I had to actually learn how to tie my shoes. Which
Right.
dang those cool kids.
But I know you were talking a little bit, how sometimes you'll have your line, going through the guides or whatnot, and you'll kind of feel it. So, what I usually like to tell people who are trying out, tying different leaders is just, test out some different links. It might also depend a little bit upon, the technique and the situation that you might be in as well. If you're fishing super clear water and you're worried about fish seeing your um, uh, not leader line, but your backing line. If you're using braid, then you might have to use a pretty long leader, or you might just be doing straight fluoro or straight mono, depending on what you're doing. But the more stained water you get, in my mind, the less amount leader that you'd have to use in a sense. Um,
Well, that brings us to another topic too of line color and
mhm,
like underwater visibility. Like they say that fluorocarbon is 100% invisible underwater,
mhm.
which I can see that. And then mono is somewhat, I guess, and then braided line is not. But
Yeah.
depending on your color of braided line, I've seen a lot of cool videos where they show how the color of different braided line looks completely different at different depths. And oddly enough, they say like red is actually one of the first colors that disappears. Now red kind of looks more black the deeper you get, I guess, from what I
Mhm.
remember. But and there's other colors that are less visible, but there's definitely a lot of cool videos out there. If you just Google, underwater line tests and stuff, because it is very interesting what the different colors do. Now, I don't know. Do you with your braided line? Do you like I for the longest time I threw like the high vis yellow so I could see it on the water, but I don't always do that anymore. I sometimes go with the more kind of camouflage. It depends on the applications. Like I have a
Mhm.
couple of different braided line with me here too. Um, uh, what's Guillermo actually got me started on this wind tamer. It's
Oh.
braid that supposedly is a little less wind resistant. I can't say that I've noticed a ton of difference with it, but this one is bright pink, so I have
Ooh.
that. I have on most of my line right now. I have the yellow, the high vis
Okay.
yellow. But then recently, I actually started buying tactics. It's a cigar line, and it's actually kind of like a camo. I don't know if you can.
Oh, it's like a moss green.
Well, but it's lots of different colors. It's
Oh,
so I kind of like it because there's enough white in it at different spots that I can see it, but it also you can't really tell, but it's like a couple
oh yeah,
different
you kind
colors.
of can. Yeah, so like it would almost break up, it being like a single strand, I guess, in a sense. I mean, that's kind of interesting. I've never seen or heard of that one before. Um, but when it comes to braid or color lines or whatever, I've primarily just used moss green braid. It's just kind of what I've had and what I've used. The situations, at least so far, that I really could have used like a brighter line is usually like right at dawn or right at dusk as that light is fading. But like, I'm like, that's what, 10, 15 minutes, that you can't really see it. So I'm like, it doesn't really justify needing to get a different colored leader or whatnot in a sense. I have seen how I have been watching like FLW and Bass and whatnot when they have tournaments and stuff like that, and I have been trying to see how some of the guys will use like spinning rods and have the like the high vis yellow leader and stuff like that on there. So I might actually try switching that up a little bit this year and see if maybe I notice something, because it can be difficult to feel some of the bites sometimes,
Hmm.
especially a lighter line, lighter setups. So maybe having a little bit more of a visual aid in a sense to see that line move, could potentially be a good thing, in a sense. So.
Yeah, no, I definitely have seen, especially when I fish a Ned rig a lot, and that is one that I will use that high vis color on because there is times where you don't feel it them pick that up at all, and the only way I know that there's something on there is you can see the line jump just a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and so that does I can definitely testify to that. So I think it's definitely worth it. Now, one thing I have noticed that is that that yellow turns to white pretty quickly. Like it doesn't hold its color, for me anyway. You still can see it, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not as high vis as it is. Like I haven't found one yet that really keeps its color for any length of time because like
Oh.
you said, braid does last a long time, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't generally keep that bright, vibrant color super long. At least in my experience. So
Interesting. No, see, I didn't know that. So there's another con, I guess, in a sense, to using, that high vis yellow. I mean, I've always used the moss green. Now, granted, like you can definitely tell, like the first 20 yards that I've used because it has gotten a little bit lighter.
hmm
But like when it comes to braid, I'm like, I don't care what color it is. Like as long as, it's still in good shape and isn't frayed or anything like that, I could care less about the color in a sense. So
Well, yeah, and I've heard like on the different tips and stuff, I've heard like that somebody will take a sharpie and just run down the
yeah,
line, and I'm like, well, black. I would almost think black would be worse, but I guess
right.
depending on your water clarity and stuff, maybe that's not as bad. But
Mm-hmm. Well, I know people have also used like a sharpie on their lines to kind of help like measure like foot or length or distance or whatever in a sense too. So and it makes sense. I mean, you think about it, you have a practically invisible thing and then you put black on it, then you're like, oh yeah, there it is.
yeah, yeah.
In a sense. So yeah. Oh, let's see here. I'm trying to think what else we may or may not have covered when it comes to line.
Oh, I know. One question I asked you earlier is what knot you use to tie to your reel, like.
Ah, to the real. So I'm pretty. basic when it comes to that. So when it comes to pretty much all my reels now, I'll do just a couple overhand knots, and then I'll take a little tiny piece of electrical tape, and then I'll just tape it right over the little knot parts, and then just tape it in the direction that the line's going to go. And then I typically don't have any trouble with it slipping or anything like that. That did remind me though, is when you're using a bait caster and you're using braid versus fluoro, I will say braid is a heck of a lot easier to get a bird's nest out than fluoro.
Oh yeah, I agree.
I
Although
mean,
I guess actually, now that I say that, I kind of agree. But I feel like sometimes braid you can get, just trying to pick it out when
mhm,
it's really. I think that the abrasion of the braid on each other,
mhm.
or when it's sometimes I find that it does almost it gets kind of bound in there a little easier than fluoro. But like I said, I have not thrown fluoro with any regularity to have too much comparison. But
Yeah, braid, like it can bird nest pretty well, but like because of at least the majority of the brands, there's usually like a kind of like a slick coating on it. And so like I feel like all of my backlashes or bird's nests that I get in braid, I can pick out. Now when it comes to fluoro, that's a little bit of a different story. That was one of the biggest things I had happening when I had reels completely backed with fluoro. Is if any time I had a backlash or a bird's nest, I would have parts in the line, and I don't know if I had bad line at the time, but like it was the first year I used that particular line on that reel, and every time I would backlash, it would like split and just break in like a couple of parts
huh.
in the reel. And I wouldn't find out until I'd be casting later and I'd just see these two ends sticking out and be like, what the hell? And the other part of it is too, is sometimes when fluoro would get backlashed and all knotted and everything, it'll create like if you run your fingers along the line, you can kind of feel like dimples or just like irregularities in the
Yep.
line after that's happened. And like, I'm very like wary of my line after that because I'm like, it's not the same. Something has changed, I don't know how much friction was on this part, is it going to break, So definitely some other things to consider as well when using different type of line.
After I just thought of a question because I was out yesterday morning on the Susquehanna fishing, and it's jerkbait time here. So what do you throw your jerkbait on? Because I was throwing it on a braid deleter and driving myself bonkers because the wind would put at the very tip of my rod. It would wrap around the top, and then I'd be trying to reel in, and then it's like no, no, nope, it's wrapped around the top, and then I'd have to. I don't know what it was about the wind, but the way the wind was
Mm-hmm.
blowing, it would wrap it around the top of my rod, and it was driving me bonkers.
Interesting. So I have a technique, a very specific technique that I use when I'm throwing the jerk bait. But majority of the time, it's in deeper water because the Susquehanna isn't necessarily like deep water per se. So in your situation, I would definitely have to set it up different. So I'll get to that in just a second. So my typical way that I typically run my jerk bait is I will have about on that rod I'll do 50-50. So I'll have like 50% of it full of braid and then the other part of it filled with fluorocarbon. So what I do, the technique, so I know a lot of people will cast out and they'll, do the jerk, jerk, jerk type of thing. So I have a technique that we just kind of call the drift and jerk. So what I'll do is I'll cast some line behind me and then I'll jerk my rod just off to the side. And I'll kind of, since I have a Hobie, I'll kind of pedal and I'll just maintain a certain speed, and it's like trolling in a sense, but like you're just jerking, and then you get your timing right, and then you just jerk, and then jerk as you're just kind of slowly pedaling around. I
Hmm.
have gotten that method keeps the jerk bait in the strike zone like all the time. So like if your jerk bait's supposed to go down to 20 feet, you let enough line go out there and you stay in that depth of water, it'll stay in that strike zone as long as you're just doing your consistent jerk thing or whatever.
Hmm.
Now when it comes to the Susquehanna, that's going to be a little bit of a different story. So with that situation, I would probably be doing a little bit heavier line, just mainly because I know there could probably be some deeper points there, but like with the rocks and stuff like that, I'm probably going to use something that has a little bit more grit to it. But I would probably still do like 50-50. So I do 50 braid and then the rest of it do like a fluorocarbon, but I might, kick it up to like 10 or 12, just
Gotcha.
depending upon, the structure and whatnot,
Well, what
um,
we were sitting on either side of a pretty good current seam. It was
mm-hmm,
flowing pretty good, but what we were doing is we were both sitting. I had a buddy there with me, and we were both sitting on either side in eddies, casting up into this current seam, and basically we'd crank or reel to get it down to depth, and just
mm-hmm.
kind of let it ride in that current, and just occasionally
Ah.
cranking. And he caught a 20. I lost a 20. Like at least I had it right at the kayak and my knot broke.
Mm,
But I had not retied since the last time I had thrown that jerk bait, so I have no clue
mm. That
how.
so yeah, this could be like a whole topic too. Is just talking about jerk baits. Is with depending on the brand of jerk bait you have, you're definitely going to want to have good hooks in there, and then like after every fish or after every like snag or something, you got to retie. Like I can't tell you how many jerk baits I have lost because I didn't retie or I didn't I got snagged and didn't retie. I caught a fish and didn't retie. Like, yeah, it can be heartbreaking. Or you're fishing a body of water that just has nothing but pike, and they just love to steal your lure. Like, it's
Oh yeah.
infuriating. And most of the time with those lakes, like if I'm gonna throw a jerk bait, like I'm gonna have like a really thin wire leader on there. But then even then, like sometimes it's just like, ugh, I'm not even gonna bother. But yeah, with that one, depending if you're not casting it out that far either, you again, different situations or whatnot, you could do like a shorter leader in a sense that you're not really casting it out that far, and go with a little bit lighter of a line, but still, like those fish in the river, man, they can fight like nothing else.
Oh, I was so sad. I especially like we got up to the spot and he caught like a 20 right off the bat, like first fish.
Mm,
And I was like, "Oh man, that's awesome." And I was actually throwing a tube at first, and then he caught like an 18 and I was like, "Okay, I'm switching to a jerk bait." And immediately caught a monster. I saw it jump like two or three times and
oh.
it looked like 20. But and I had it right next to my kayak and it broke. And
Ah,
I did catch a few more then, so it was not
mhm.
anywhere near that size, but it was still fun. And so now I'm looking to go back there and throw the jerkbait again because I, up until that point, had not had a ton of luck with the jerkbait, but it was working well in that spot. So I'm going to definitely try that again. So I'm looking forward to going back and hopefully maybe finding one of those other big fish, but we'll see.
Heck yeah. That's how I got my PD Smalley in Lake St. Clair was that drift and jerk method.
Okay.
that method, it's tried and true for me. I mean, granted, I can't use it on tournament day, depending on the tournament series, because it is considered a form of trolling.
Trolling, right?
I that's another topic for another day. But yeah,
changes coming to the KVL now.
But yeah, it's definitely a good method.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'll have to. I think I almost remember talking to you about that a long time ago, because I remember I tried it on the river and I caught my first ever walleye doing it. But
I've caught walleye. That's the thing about like doing this drift and jerk method, is like it depending on the body of water too. Like my love-hate relationship with Madison chain, I've caught so many different species on the jerk bait. You know, pike, walleye, bass. I've caught a gar on that thing. I've caught a catfish on a jerk bait before. Like, wow. I thought I had a muskie, and that was actually in Lake St. Clair. I thought it was a muskie because it just was like dead weight, and just the way it would kind of roll, I was like, oh God, I got a muskie on or something. No, it was a big old catfish. Like, Jesus. Yeah, and hybrid bass, they love them. So yeah, and heck, even crappie. I've got crappie on it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you never know what you're gonna get sometimes.
Alrighty, well, I feel like we've covered a lot.
We have.
So, I'll try and put some links in the show notes to some of the knots that we've talked about. Maybe some of the underwater studies, and so that you guys can check that out. But if you guys have any questions about which line to use, just drop a question in either the Facebook Noobs chat. That's probably the easiest place. And then, we can definitely, let us know what's bait you're using and kind of where you're fishing. And we can definitely kind of advise you on, maybe the best line choice, and at least in our opinions anyway. And that definitely, it's open debate. That's one of the cool things about the Noobs chat on the Facebook, because you'll get a lot of different opinions, but it seems to be, for the most part, pretty civil, and people are very helpful. So definitely keep that up. And so anything else, Susie? I know.
I can't think of anything else right now. It's really hard to believe that we are almost done with October.
I know.
October.
Yeah, I can tell just because it's freaking getting dark at like 6:30 now.
I know.
What the heck?
I know. Man. And then, like, what is it? Is it 2 weeks from? Oh, it's 2 weeks from today. We have the time change. Oh.
I'm like, I thought we weren't doing that anymore. When are
I didn't think we were doing that anymore either, but I don't know. They keep changing their minds about everything.
Yeah, no, I got out on the water. I was like, oh, we'll hit the water at sunrise on Saturday, and then he's like, oh, okay, 7:00. I'm like, 7:00 is when summer, and then sure enough,
I know.
I'm like, what the heck? And then it gets dark by 6:30. I'm like, come on.
Yeah, there's definitely less than 12 hours of sunlight, and it just after the time change, it just goes downhill from there.
Oh yeah, yeah, crazy.
Oh shoot, we'll get through it.
Yep.
Get through it.
Yep.
So,
alrighty, Susie. Well, thanks again. It's been a fun episode. It's not bad when we kind of just go with what we know. So, but I am gonna. I know we'll have a little bit of different show. The next one that airs, it's going to be actually one of my old high school teachers who has, he was an avid outdoorsman. Definitely somebody who kind of got me interested in everything outdoors. He loves hunting and fishing, and but he definitely has some good stories, and I have some good stories about him as my history teacher too. So
awesome.
Look forward to that. And yeah, so again, thanks for tuning in tonight though, guys. And I hope this information helps you. And if you have any questions, like I said, hit us up, and we'll definitely answer those as best as possible. But until next time, this has been another episode of Bass Fishing for Noobs here on the Paddle and Fin podcast, where we bring you the techniques, the tricks, and the tips to help you rip more lips. So having a good night. Thanks, Susie.